Lee looked up from the table toward Grant. This will have a very happy effect on my army. Grant said that unless Lee had other suggestions on the agreement, I will have a copy of the letter made in ink and sign it. For a moment, Lee hesitated. There is only one thing I would like to mention, he said. The cavalrymen and artillerymen in our own army own their own horses. Our organization differs from yours. I would like to understand whether these men will be permitted to retain their horses. Grant pointed out that the terms as written do not allow this. Thoughtfully, Lee read the second page. No, I see the terms do not allow it. That's clear. Grant saw in Lee's face the desire to have this change made. Grant was the victor. He could afford to be generous, but he also had an edge to keep. I will arrange it this way, he said. I will not change the terms as they are written, but I will instruct the officers to let all the men who claim to own a horse or mule take the animals home with them to work their little farms. Lee was pleased. This will have the best possible effect on the men. It will be very gratifying and will do much toward reconciling our people. Small talk was made as the Indian drew up the ink copy. Grant called up his officers and introduced them. Some offered their right hands. Lee shook those. He bowed to the men who did not offer to shake hands. Then Lee turned back to Grant. I have 1,000 or more of your men as prisoners, Lee said. I shall be glad to send them to you in your lines as soon as it can be arranged, for I have no provisions for them. Perhaps thinking that might sound selfish, Lee added, I have indeed nothing for my own men. They have been living for the last few days princely upon parched corn, and are badly in need of both rations and forage. He said he had telegraphed Lynchburg for supplies, which should supply his men when the trainloads arrived. The Union officers glanced at Sheridan. He had seized those same Confederate supplies the night before. Lee had not yet been informed. Grant didn't see any need to embarrass Lee by mentioning the facts. I will take steps at once to have your army supplied with rations, but I am so sorry we have no forage for animals. He asked how many men Lee had. Indeed, I am not able to say. Lee explained that his losses had been heavy and all his papers had been destroyed to keep them from falling into federal hands. I have no means of ascertaining our present strength, he concluded. The Union commander asked, Suppose I send over 25,000 rations. Do you think that will be a sufficient supply? Lee nodded. I think it will be ample, and it will be a great relief, I assure you. The surrender papers were ready. Lee ordered Marshall to copy them. Then Lee picked up the pen. Addressed to Grant from Lee, the document was simple. I have received your letter of this date containing the terms of surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia as proposed by you. As they are substantially the same as those expressed in your letter of the 8th instant, they are accepted. I proceed to designate the proper officers to carry the stipulations into effect. Very respectfully, your obedient servant. Lee signed it, then arose and shook hands with Grant. Lee bowed to the others and walked down the hall onto the long porch. Federal officers there snapped to attention. They saluted smartly. Lee put on his hat and returned the salute, then pulled on his gloves. For a moment, the gray-bearded man who had just surrendered his army stood looking across the valley. His troops, not yet aware the war was over, lay on a hillside where their observers surely had seen the famous gray traveler standing with the Union horses.
Mommy, I don't know.
Lee brought his gloved hand together in several sharp smacks. Orderly. His voice was deep in his throat and a little unsteadily. Orderly. Sergeant Tucker brought Traveler into sight. Lee stuck his foot into the stirrup and swung into the saddle. He settled into the leather with a sigh clearly heard by the onlookers. Grant walked onto the porch and down the steps. Before he reached the gate, he stopped abruptly and swept his hat from his head before Lee. The other Union officers did the same. Nobody spoke. Lee, keeping the silence, raised his hat and turned Traveler out of the McLean yard. As he rode down the lane, his soldiers started to cheer him. But there was something about Lee's appearance and the things they had seen which caused their cheers to slide uncertainly back into their throats. They swept toward him. Someone asked the question they were not ready to believe. "General, are we surrendered?" For a moment it appeared Lee tried to ignore the question. He urged Traveler forward, but the hungry, sick, and valiant men swarmed toward Lee. In an instant they were about him, bareheaded, with tear-wet faces, thronging him, kissing his hand, his boots, his saddle, weeping, cheering him amid the tears, shouting his name to the very skies. A soldier related. Lee reined in the big gray horse. Lee bared his gray head. "Men," he said, "we have fought through the war together. I have done my best for you. My heart is too full to say any more." Tears flowed down his bearded cheeks as he moved toward a tree down the road. He dismounted and began to pace, apparently feeling for the first time the impact of what he had done. His officers left him alone in the late afternoon of that Sunday in April 1865. After 4 terrible years, the Civil War was over. Robert E. Lee, Christian general and gentleman, wrote his last order to the army he had led so long and so well. After 4 years of arduous service, marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. He began. He paid tribute to the survivors of so many hard-fought battles, and said he had determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those whose past services have endeared them to their countrymen. He explained that men could return to their homes until exchanged. They were really prisoners of war, paroled to their homes. "I earnestly pray that a merciful God will extend to you his blessing and protection," Lee added, then concluded, "I bid you an affectionate farewell." In a few days Lee took off the sword he had worn, to never raise again except in defense of his native state. After 40 years in uniform, Lee was again a private citizen. End of chapter 12.